Hello and welcome to another episode of the Game in a Nutshell series by Nithrania YouTube channel. My name is Branislav Berec and Game in a Nutshell is a series of videos designed for explaining the board game rules. So today we're going to learn how to play Tekhenu. Tekhenu, Obelisk of the Sun. Tekhenu is the word for obelisk, that's why the name of the game. It's designed by Daniel Tassini and David Turci and published by Board and Dice Studio, and the game comes with the solo rules as well, but in this video I'll show you how to play a 2 to 4 player game, and the solo rules will be explained in another separate video. So let's get started. To set the game up, place the game board in the middle of the table. Then place this obelisk with this obelisk disc in its designated location. Locate this arrow on the obelisk wheel and make sure it's lined up against one of these dividing lines. Then, from this starting line, count 4 sections and place this halfway scoring marker on that line. Then, from this space, count 4 more sections and place the endgame scoring marker in that space. Then shuffle these pillar tiles and create a face down stack, and then place the first 3 tiles face up on these spaces. These are Horus bonus tiles, and you can shuffle them and place them randomly on these spaces on the game board. However, for your first game, you may use these pre-printed bonuses instead, and that's what I'm going to do in this video. Then place 1 gold resource on both of these spaces, and place another one to this space, then the next one over here, and the last one goes to this space. Then prepare the drawback. In a 4-player game, place all dice into the drawback. In a 3-player game, remove 2 gray dice from the game, return them to the box, and place all the remaining dice in the drawback. In a 2-player game, remove 1 die of each color except for the gray, and place all the remaining dice into the drawback. I will set up a 3-player game, so I will remove 2 gray dice from the game. Now, for each section around the obelisk wheel, draw and roll 3 random dice and add them to that section. Those 6 sections on this obelisk disc represent how this obelisk casts the shadow at a particular moment. At this moment, pretending that the light is coming from here, these 2 sections are sunny sections, these 2 sections are dark sections, and these 2 sections are shaded sections. Furthermore, each section is divided into 3 areas: pure area, tainted area, and forbidden area. The placement of each die in each section depends on the color of the die and whether the section is sunny, dark, or shaded. You can find the instructions for the placement on the obelisk wheel. So in the sunny area, black dice are forbidden dice, gray and yellow dice are tainted dice, and only white dice would be pure. In this shaded area, white dice are tainted, and these brown dice are pure. Continue like this until you have 3 dice in each section. Then give each player a player board and all the components of 1 color. Place 6 statues in this area, 10 buildings over here. These pillars don't have any dedicated space, so you can either have them next to your player board or you can decorate your player board with them for the time being, and place these 4 production markers on the space 2 on each production track. Then take the population and happiness markers and place the population markers of all players in space 5 of this track under this 3 Egyptian people symbol, and place these happiness tokens in space 2 under this symbol. Place 1 of these markers of each player on the space 10 of the scoring track, and for the moment, leave the other token next to your player board. Each player also receives 1 gold and 1 scribe token. Shuffle these decks of blessing cards, technology cards, and decree cards, and if you play a 2-player game, remove this technology card marked as T16 and decree card D20 from the game, and then create the card market. Fill in the empty spaces in this yellow and red section, and the yellow section has 2 blessing cards and 1 technology card face up, and the red section contains 2 blessing cards and 2 technology cards. For the moment, green and blue sections remain empty. Deal each player 2 decree cards, and each player chooses 1 to keep and the other is discarded to the bottom of the decree deck. Players keep these decree cards secret from other players. Now, take these starting cards and randomly draw 2 cards per player plus 1. So in a 3-player game, draw 7 random starting cards. Also, place these 4 destiny cards next to these starting cards. Randomly choose the starting player, and then starting with this player and proceeding clockwise, each player chooses one of these starting cards. These starting cards provide some initial bonuses or resources. So let's say the blue player would choose this card, pink player might choose this one, and the purple player might choose this card. Now, in the reverse order, each player would choose a second card. Now all players sum up these initiative values from both cards. So the blue player has the initiative of 12, pink player has the initiative of 11, and the purple player has the initiative of 9. The player with the highest initiative becomes the starting player for the game. So place that player's marker on the first space of the turn order track. The player with the second highest initiative goes second, and so on and so forth. In case of a tie, like in this example, the player with a single card with the highest initiative wins that tie. Then, using this new turn order, beginning with the starting player, each player chooses one of the available destiny cards. Then all players receive their bonuses and resources from the starting cards and the destiny cards. After that, you can return the starting cards back into the box and keep your chosen destiny card face up next to your player board. The value of the destiny card may be important later in the game. With that, you're ready to play. The game is played over 16 rounds. Each round, following this turn order, each player will take one turn, and on their turn, players will take one die from the obelisk and either take the god action, which corresponds to the section from which they take the die, or they will produce resources. Then they will take that die and place it on one side of the scales on their player board. Every 2 rounds, so when all players have taken 2 dice, this obelisk will rotate one section. That means those sections may change the lightning conditions and the position of those dice will change. Then every 4 rounds, that means after 2 rotations, when all players have taken 4 dice, the balance on these scales will be evaluated. You have to calculate the difference between the die values on one side versus the other side. If it is unbalanced, you may suffer some penalties and lose some victory points. The actual balance is marked on this track, and the position of players' markers on this track determines the turn order for next 4 rounds. Then every 8 rounds, which means every 4 rotations, that's halfway through the game, you will reach this half-game scoring. Now, this game is something what we can call a point salad game, which means you can score victory points almost everywhere. You can build your buildings as quarries and workshops in this area and score victory points for that. You can build your buildings and pillars in this area and score victory points for that. You can score victory points for happiness on this track. You can score victory points for number of statues you build over the course of the game, and obviously the more you build, the more victory points you can get. You can score 2 victory points for each production track where you reach the maximum level. You can get victory points for building buildings, and at the end of the game, you will also score victory points for your decree cards. So to sum it up, after every 2 rounds, perform rotation. After every 2 rotations, perform this evaluation of the balance of your scales. So you will perform it after 2 rotations, 4, 6, and 8 rotations. Then after 4 rotations, perform the half-game scoring, and after another 4 rotations, perform the endgame scoring. So let's take a look at how to perform actions each round. As I said, in this turn order, each player has to take 1 die from the obelisk area, and you may only take either pure dice, so dice in this outer circle, or tainted dice, so dice in this middle circle, but you may never take forbidden dice. So in this example, in this dark area, White dice are forbidden and you may not take that die. Then, after you take the die, you either perform the god action associated with that section, or you will produce resources with that die. Now, based on whether the dice is pure or tainted, you will take that die and place it on the corresponding side of these scales on your player board. So when you take pure die, place it over here. When you take tainted die, place it on this side. Some actions require spending resources, and if you don't have those resources, you may not perform that action. That means you either have to take a die from a different section or take that die, but you have to produce resources. There are 4 basic resources in the game: papyrus, limestone, granite, and bread, and these tokens represent 5 species of that particular resource. Gold is a wild resource and can be used instead of any other basic resource, and this is a faith token, and together with scribes they are not resources. Before explaining all the gods' actions and how to produce resources, I have to explain how to use these scribes. When you take a die from an obelisk wheel, let's say this one, you may spend 1 or even more scribes from your personal reserve, and each scribe can change the value of the die by 1 or 2 pips. So in this case, from die value 3, using 1 scribe, I can make it value 1 or 2, or 4 or 5. If I would decide to change the value of this die, I can only make it 2 or 3. I cannot go from 1 down to 6, that's not allowed. You can use more than 1 scribe if you wish so you can change the value of this die to 2, 3, 4 or 5. When you change the value of the die, the change is permanent. Discard the scribe, and when you place the die on your player board, use the changed value. One last note, all players are limited to the number of components they have. So you may not build more pillars, statues or buildings that you have on your player board. And once placed, those buildings may never be moved. So now let's talk about all the 6 god actions in the game. And by the way, these dividing lines beautifully point out to the section of the game board which corresponds to the action of that particular god. So this is one section, this is one section, and so on and so forth. But let's start with this Horus action. So when you take a die from this area, let's say we'll take this die, you can build a statue from your player board, and to do that you have to spend some resources, in this case it's granite. You have to build them from left to right, and the first one costs 4 granite, second one costs 3 granite, and so on and so forth. To build the statue, spend the resources, and then you have 2 options where to build the statue. The first option is to build it around the obelisk, to honor one of the gods. The value of the chosen die determines the god you can honor with your statue. So in this case, it's Osiris, it's this section. So place the statue on an empty space, and notice that this space is only available in a 3 and a 4 player game, and this one is only available in a 4 player game. From now on, if any other player will take a die from the section where you have the statue and perform the god action, which corresponds to that section, then you will take the bonus which is depicted next to that bonus tile. So in this case, it's increasing your happiness by 2. In addition, in a 3 player game only, you also receive that bonus immediately. In a 2 player game, you don't receive that bonus immediately, but you take that bonus not only when other players take that action, but even when you take the action of that god. Building the second statue in the same section does not provide any additional bonuses. The second option where you can build your statue is either one of these 2 empty spaces next to this temple complex, or one of these 2 empty spaces next to workshops and quarries. Those spaces will score victory points during the scoring phase. So you can take the statue, place it in any of those empty spaces, take the gold from that space, and in this case, the value of your chosen die doesn't matter. If you place it next to the temple complex, and you have some pillars in the temple, score 3 victory points for each pillar in the corresponding column or in the corresponding row. This section of the obelisk wheel is associated with the Egyptian god Ra, and it allows you to build one pillar in this temple complex. The value of the die determines which pillar you can build. This one can only be built with the dice of value 1 and 2, this one with the dice 3 and 4, and this one with 5 and 6. To build a pillar, first pay the indicated costs which are depicted at the top of each tile. Here you have to pay 2 limestone and 1 granite. Here you have to pay 4 limestone, and again 2 limestone and 1 granite. So let's say we use this die, and with number 1 we can build this pillar. We have to pay 2 limestone and 1 granite, and then I can take the tile and place it on any empty space in the temple. You can rotate the tile any way you want and place one of your pillars on that tile. In addition, receive the reward which is shown on the space below that tile. Then you can immediately score the victory points. First, score the victory points from the space from which you took the tile, so in this case it's 1 point. Then if you have any buildings near the temple, score 1 victory point for each building in the same column or same row. Not for the statue, only for the buildings. And finally, score 1 victory point for each edge of the tile where the color of that edge matches the color of the edge of the adjacent tile. So in this case it's 1 victory point. In this example, it would be 1 victory point for this edge and 1 victory point for this edge. And if you place it in the corner, then for each matching color you would score 2 victory points. So in this case this would be 4 victory points immediately. And finally, when you build a pillar and the color of the background of that pillar tile matches the lighting conditions, which is currently aligned with this raw action, in this case it's shaded area, you can use the ability on that pillar tile. In this case it is shaded area, so you could use it. You can find the explanation of all those abilities in the rulebook. Finally, place the die on the scales on your player board, slide the pillar tiles to the right, and draw the new pillar tile face up. When you use this Hathor god action, you can take a die, spend some bread, and build a building near this temple complex. The cost of building are from 2 bread to 4 bread. Take the leftmost building from your player board and ignore the bread cost under that building for the moment. They will be important at the end of the game. Then place the building in any empty space and make sure you use the spaces for your player count, and after you place the building, pay the indicated cost from your personal reserve. Then receive the reward from each space in the corresponding column, or if you would place it here, from the corresponding row. And from each space where you have a pillar, score 3 victory points immediately. And from each empty space, receive 1 token, exactly 1 token of that type. So in this case, you would receive 1 faith token, 1 bread, 1 papyrus, and 1 limestone. Place those resources into your personal reserve. If you place the building in this space, you get 1 faith token, 1 papyrus, 1 bread, and you don't get anything for this kind of space, and you don't get anything for pillars of opposing players. If you place the building in a center column or center row, you would take 1 token from each empty space, including the gold. Then, after taking that Hathor action, as this symbology indicates, after taking resources and victory points from your new building, you can also increase your population based on the die value you have chosen. You can move your population marker as many spaces as the value of the die, so in this case it's 3 spaces. Now, the first time any population marker reaches the space number 9, this green section, add the cards to the 3rd section of the card market. Similarly, first time any population marker reaches the space 13 or above, so this blue section, add the cards to the blue section of the card market. This section of the game board is dedicated to the Egyptian goddess Bastet. To perform that action, you have to pay 2 papyrus, and then you can increase the happiness of your people by the value of the chosen die. So if this is the blue player's turn, they move their happiness marker by 2 spaces. The number of your happy people can never be higher than the number of your people, so the happiness marker can never go beyond the population marker. Any excess value is simply lost. Then the value of the chosen die determines the bonus. If you use the die with value 1 or 2, you get 2 scribe tokens. With value 3 or 4, you get 1 token, and with value 5 or 6, you get no bonus. In addition, the first time your happiness marker reaches space 16, you get 1 gold as a bonus. When it reaches number 19, you get 1 scribe, and upon reaching space number 21, you get 1 extra action. It's a free immediate action. You can take any god action, and you don't take any die. However, you can use a virtual die of any value. When you take this Thoth action and take a die from this section, you can take 1 or more cards from this card market. The position of your happiness marker determines which segments you can take the cards from. So if the blue marker is in this red area, blue player can only take cards from red and yellow area, so either from red section or yellow section. Purple player, having the happiness marker in the green area, can take cards from the green section or red or yellow. And even though we already have cards in the blue section, no player has the happiness marker there, and that means no player can take the cards from the blue section. Now, if you take this action with a die of value 1 or 2, you can take 1 card for free. If you take the action with a die of a value 3 or 4, like this one, you must pay 2 papyruses, and then you must take 2 cards. Those 2 cards must come from 1 section, and if using the die of a value 5 or 6, like these ones, you must pay 3 papyruses and take 3 cards, again from 1 section only. After you choose a die, let's say this one, before choosing the cards, you can pay 1 papyrus and discard all the cards in 1 section. Then refill the empty spaces with new cards. You can only do this once for each section during your turn. So, when you choose a die and choose your section, take the selected cards and then refill the empty spaces with new cards. These white cards are blessing cards and they are placed face up next to your player board. The card indicates when and how you can use it, and these are one-time cards, so after using the card, discard it to the bottom of the corresponding deck. These yellow cards are technology cards. Place them face up next to your player board and they provide ongoing effects. These decree cards are scored at the end of the game. They are scoring cards and keep them secret from other players. When you take this Osiris action, it allows you to build 1 building as a quarry or a workshop in this Osiris area. You don't need any resources to do that, but you have to reduce your happiness by 1. Take the leftmost building from your player board, and again, the costs under that building has no effect on this action, and the value of the chosen die determines the row where you can place that building. You may place it in any empty space in that row, and after that, take the reward from that space. In this first row, you may increase the indicated production marker by 1 space and then take 1 resource of that type. So, with this building, it relates to bread production. I can increase this bread production marker by 1 space and take 1 bread resource as a reward. The rewards in the second row are the same as in the first row. However, the first player to build a building in a second row will take the gold as a bonus. When you place a building in a third row, you may increase the production markers of both resources by 1 space and take the indicated resource. In the fourth row, you can increase the production markers on both resources and take indicated resource and 1 gold. When you place a building in the fifth row, you increase the production marker of the indicated resource by 2 spaces and take 2 resources of that type as a bonus. And when you place the building in this last row, you increase the production marker of that indicated resource by 2 spaces, and then you increase the production marker of any resource by 1 space. It can be a different resource, it can be the same one. Then take the 2 resources of the shown type into your personal reserve. So just to repeat, the value of the chosen die determines the row where you can place that building. In addition to 6 god actions, you can also produce resources. 4 colors of dice correspond with 4 resources in the game. With yellow dice you can produce papyrus, with brown bread, with white limestone, and with black dice you can produce granite. And that means that with gray dice you may not produce resources. So when you take a die and you want to produce resources, the value of the chosen die determines the quantity of resources you produce. So in this case it's 5 granite. Now compare the die value to the position of the production marker for that particular resource. In this case it's 5 compared to 4. That means you can only keep 4 resources, and any excess resources are placed on this tainted side of your scales. Each such resource counts as 1 pip of a die on this tainted side. You may only keep and spend these resources. Excess resources placed on the tainted side of the scales may never be spent. There's one more type of action you can take, and it's called Anubis action. To perform this special action, you have to spend exactly 2 scribes. When you do, you may take any die from the obelisk wheel, and it means literally any die, even the forbidden die, and take any action with it in any section. Or you can even produce resources with that die. Then place that die below the scales on your player board, as indicated by this symbology, and that die doesn't count towards the balance on the scales. If you have enough scribes, you can even combine them. You can spend 2 scribes for this Anubis action, and you can spend another scribe to change the value of that die. Every 2 rounds, which means when players have either 2 or 4 dice on their player board, perform the rotation. Move the obelisk 1 section clockwise, which means the shadow of the obelisk rotates. If players would have 4 dice on their player board, pause the rotation process now, evaluate the balance on their scales, and then return back to the following procedure. You have to add new dice to these shaded sections. Roll 1 die for each player, so in a 3-player game, it's going to be 3 dice to both shaded locations, and adjust the position of all dice around the obelisk based on the new lightning conditions. Then you can begin the new round. When you perform the rotation, and players have 4 dice on their player boards, pause the rotation and perform the so-called Maat Phase. Maat is an Egyptian god for justice and divine order. To determine the balance on your scales, sum up the values of dice on both pure and tainted side, and on tainted side, each resource token counts as 1 point. So in this example, we have 7 on the pure side and value 9 on the tainted side. If you have any faith tokens, you can use them now, and you can place them on either side of the scales, and each faith token is worth 1 point. So now we have 8 on the pure side and 9 on the tainted side. Move the player markers from the turn track to this Maat track based on their balance. Since blue player has a -1, the marker would be here. If that negative difference would be higher, players would receive the penalty of 1, 2, or 3 victory points. If the difference would be positive, even higher numbers, there is no penalty. However, the balance determines the new turn order. Players with 0 balance, with the perfect balance, go first. Then player or players with a balance 1 or -1 would go to the second position, and so on and so forth. In case of a tie, the player with the higher Ankh value on the destiny card goes first. Now, you will clear the scales, but if this would be the 4th rotation, so the second Maat Phase, you have to perform the half-game scoring. Again, I will talk about that in a second. Then the Maat procedure continues. Clear the scales, which means place all the dice back into the drawback, and place all the resource tokens and faith tokens back to the general supply, and if you would have any unspent faith tokens, those will be removed as well, and return the destiny cards too. Using the new turn order, each player takes 1 of those destiny cards, including the reward. So that's the end of the Maat Phase, And now that all dice from the scales are back in the drawback, you can continue the rotation with placing new dice in the shaded areas. Every two Maat phases, so when this arrow points toward the half game scoring, or when it points towards the end game scoring, during the Maat phase, perform that scoring. First, score this Osiris area. In each of those 4 districts, the player with the most pieces wins the 3 victory points award. In case of a tie, the topmost piece wins the tie. Statues counts as a piece in both columns, so here in this column it's the purple player winning the 3 victory points because they have 2 pieces, but the statue is the topmost piece. Then score this temple complex. First, each building and statue around the temple scores 1 victory point, so blue player would have 5 victory points here. Then each pillar within the complex scores 1 victory point for each building and the statue of the same color in the corresponding column or the corresponding row. So this pillar would score 1, 2, 3 victory points, this one would score 1 and 2 additional victory points. Pink player would score 2 victory points for this pillar, but no victory points for this pillar. Then score the statues on the player board. In this example, blue player would score 6 victory points. If they would have 4 statues built, they would score 10 victory points. Then score the buildings on the player board. In this case, blue player would score 2 victory points, however, they have to pay 4 breads. They only have 1 bread and 2 gold, which means they can spend 3 breads, and for each bread they are unable to pay, they have to lose 3 victory points. Then if you have any production marker in the topmost space, score 2 victory points for each such production marker. Finally, score 3 victory points for each triangle you have reached with your happiness marker, so the purple player here would score 6 victory points. Blue player would only score 3 victory points. In addition, if this is the end of the game, reveal all your decrees and you can score up to 3 of those decrees, however, only 1 of each type. So in this case, this player could only score this one or this one, not both. And again, only at the end of the game, the player whose marker is in the first position of the turn order track will receive 3 victory points, and only in a 3-player game or a 4-player game, the player in the second position would score 2 victory points. Then the player with the most points is the winner. So that's it, that's how you play Obelisk of the Sun. If you have any questions or comments, please put them into the comment sections below, I'll be happy to answer your questions. If you like the series, please subscribe. My name is Branislav Berec, you've been watching Game in a Nutshell, and hope to see you next time.